All right, everyone, I just want to thank you for joining us for the Central Coast Community Energy Residential Electric Generation Rate Workshop. This will give you an opportunity to preview the rate design process that we use to build out what will be going into effect in January 2022 and will remain in effect through December 2024. As folks continue to register and join as we are moving forward and getting started, I do want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things here. We do have, as I mentioned, a recording going on as we're in the session, so please be mindful of that. Additionally, we will be asking that you put all of your questions into the Q&A. You can find that tool on your toolbar. So if you don't see the toolbar directly, you can kind of hover your mouse a little bit over the screen and it will pop up. You'll see a Q&A, and if you click on that, you can type your questions there. We will have a Q&A and start to answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation portion. So we will be here together today for about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how many questions the group has. We will kick things off with an introduction of the members of the team who are here. So we will, with both 3CE staff members and New Gen staff member who will be presenting this evening. Then we'll jump over and talk a little bit about our current rate design and the approach that we use to build out the rates that we have now. And then kind of a brief high-level overview of what the pros and cons are of that rate structure, and then go forward into what our future approach to rate design for beginning in 2022 will be, what the pros and cons are of the new rate design, and then we will also walk through a few bill comparison options so that you can see for yourself a little bit about how that design looks when you compare current bills to the future rate options that you'll have available to you. After that, I'll just do a quick wrap up, in conclusion, and then we'll open things up to the Q&A. So we do have a really large group. We're approaching about 150 attendees right now. So if we do not have an opportunity to answer every question individually, then what we will do following this meeting is that anything that we have not had a chance to answer, we will build out an FAQ and post those frequently asked questions on the site for cost of service. So you'll have an opportunity following the meeting to find both the recording of our presentation this evening at that page on our page, and also find the frequently asked questions there if we don't get to all of them. Like I said, it's a large group, but perhaps we'll be able to cover them in the time provided. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the team that we have here with us this evening. We have our CEO, Tom Habashi. We also have our CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Tiffany Law. Additionally, we have J.R. Killigrew, our Director of Communications and Outreach. And then we do have an public engagement representative or associate, Oswaldo Martinez, who will be helping out with anything that you drop in the chat. So if you see someone respond, that's who that is. And then from New Gen, we have Scott Vernon, and he will actually be doing the bulk of the presentation regarding the bill comparison and the rate design process. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'll jump in and share a little bit about our organization and who we are and how we built out our existing rate structure before Scott jumps in and talks about where it is that we're headed. So just in case you were recently enrolled here and don't necessarily know who we are, Central Coast Community Energy, and for some of you who have been with us for a long time, you may remember us as Monterey Bay Community Power. Central Coast Community Energy is actually now made up of over 30 communities, as you can see here. We are actually a joint powers authority purchasing energy from clean and renewable sources, and that energy is then delivered to you by the investor-owned utility. In most cases, depending on which community you're in, that is going to be PG&E. We may have a few customers from our future enrolling territories on, so that could be Southern California Edison. So a CCA is a community choice aggregator, and that is basically the term for an organization like ours that is purchasing power. So 3CE goes out and sources that power, and like I said, it still continues to be delivered to you by PG&E or Southern California Edison, and they also are continuing to provide you with a single bill. So you may not necessarily have noticed at the time of enrollment any difference really to your bill or your energy statement overall, but that is only because you're still receiving that delivery service and that billing from your same utility. So with our current approach to rate design and the way that we have put our rates in place to date, we started with a structure that actually began with PG&E's generation rate. And that existing generation rate, then we subtracted the power charge and difference adjustment, or PCIA, and any other exit fees that are imposed by PG&E and have been sanctioned by the CPUC. At the end, we took that number and we discounted that resulting rate by the same fraction across the board. So ultimately, that means that every customer received the exact same discount off of those generation rates. The pros to that are essentially just what I said, in that it allowed us to say and know that every customer, right, would do better with 3CE than they would with remaining it with PG&E's generation services. The con was, though, that it doesn't necessarily reflect the true cost to serve each 3CE customer base. And it follows PG&E legacy rate structures, which are really designed to support PG&E service and not necessarily designed to support 3CE services or programs. It requires also that we adjust our rates as often as 6 times a year to correspond to every time PG&E makes a rate adjustment. So what that looks like since 2018, since inception, that you can see on this graph here that there have been multiple times, even within a single year, where PG&E has made changes to the generation rate, and then as such, we would have to react, right, in response to that, go back and make adjustments as well. Over time, though, what we've done is we have, for our customer base, managed to actually, under our existing model, provide over $50 million in savings to our customers relative to what they would have spent on generation services had they remained with PG&E. So we did that in 2018, initially in the form of an annual rebate. And we started off providing a 3% rebate off of the generation charges to our customers. So what they were billed for generation, at the end of the year, they would get a 3% rebate on their bill. In 2019, that was increased to a 5% rebate. However, based on the feedback that we were receiving, we kind of saw that, customers didn't necessarily want to wait an entire year, right, to see the benefits of their participation in our service. They wanted their discount to be provided, more timely. And so we made adjustments. And actually in January 2020, we actually not only increased the discount to a 7% discount, we also made that a discount that was an on-bill savings. They were able to see that the 7% discount from their generation rate was actually there on their bill on a month-to-month basis. Then, in response to COVID-19, we actually provided a 50% discount off of the generation rate charges to all of our customers. That is every customer class, from commercial, residential, agricultural, in the months of May and June. So they had a 50% bill reduction. And then July through September, we went back to a 2% discount. At the end of 2020, though, that resulting cost benefit to our customers was actually slightly higher than the 7% that our customers would have seen if we had just stayed with 7% throughout the year. But by putting that 50% in May and June, it allowed for the customers to actually experience that cost savings at the time that there was the greatest need, when everyone was sheltering in place and there was a lot of uncertainty. So looking at that previous design, our future design actually is designed to address some of those cons that we talked about earlier. So we're looking to calculate, right, the cost to actually serve customers, including power supply costs, the general administrative expenses, of course, the energy programs that we provide, and funding the rate stabilization reserves for the fiscal years in October 2021 through September 2024. But we also looked at segmenting each customer class based on size and consumption profile. So to do that analysis and comparison so that we could allocate the average annual cost to serve those various customer classes. So instead of making it the same discount over every single class, we actually just use the same criteria to evaluate the cost to serve the customer. And we adjusted the cost allocation, right, to ensure that each customer class will still save relative to remaining with PG&E generation services. So we designed those rates to recover the cost to serve from each customer class, but of course that resulting amount could be different by customer class. So the pros to this approach going forward, of course, it has allowed us to significantly reduce the number of rate schedules that we have. So it's less confusing, fewer rate schedules. It reflects, of course, accurately the cost to serve each customer class. As I mentioned, I can't say that enough, right? That it actually has every customer class evaluated based on that same criteria and including the usage and consumption patterns. It makes a necessary adjustment to ensure that there's an orderly transition to the true cost reflection of cost of service. And then it eliminates the need for us to make numerous adjustments throughout the year because we're no longer tied to PG&E's generation rate. We've actually built out these rates in a way that we can keep them stable for 3 years. So we're providing predictability, fairness, a simplicity, and a competitiveness to the rate design that didn't exist previously. And then, of course, we're also going to have an additional transitional option. And Scott at Nugent, of course, will go over that in a little bit more detail so that there's still an option that customers can choose between at the time that we make this transition. So you have more than one option available to you. And then there's really only one con to the structure, which means that although it guarantees competitive rates for each customer class, it doesn't extend that same guarantee to every customer because it's not a blanket discount now. It's actually customized based on the cost to serve each customer class. So with these changes, we have deployed essentially an outreach and engagement schedule to kind of get the word out to customers and get an opportunity to preview this long before it goes live. We started off, of course, this is the last in a series of 5 workshops. You can go to the cost of service webpage on our site and see the recordings of previous workshops. But going forward into next month, we'll actually be taking this rate design and information to a workshop of the Policy and Operations Board. So it'll be a great time for them to kind of see everything and provide additional review and feedback. The Community Advisory Council also will review in June, and then the Policy Board will review and approve rates in mid-June on June 16th. The new rates that will not become effective until January 22, but they'll be in place for 3 years, so all the way through December 31st of 2024. So who does this affect ultimately? So all of our rate paying customers, but this particular workshop is designed to go over some of the bill comparisons and answer questions that primarily are for our residential customers. So 3CE serves about 325,000 customers. That's about 91% of the residential customers in the shared PG&E service area that we work with. In addition to our standard rate plans, 3CE is also serving care and fair customers, so over 64,000. We have net energy metering customers, and there's also those are our solar, wind, and battery storage customers. You may, some of the attendees on the call may be solar customers. There is also a separate webinar that was recorded you can watch regarding net energy metering. And then we have about 3,800, probably over 4,000 now. These numbers are a couple of weeks old. So there may be a few more, but about 3,800 electric vehicle customers that are also residential customers. So without further ado, I'm actually going to turn this next part of the presentation over to Scott Vernon from NewGen, who can provide more detail about the upcoming changes in 2022.
Great. Thank you, Lena. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, residential customers, for joining us this evening. It's my pleasure to be here. And I'm going to walk through a few items with you. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the changes in the time of use rates, the rates that are defined by periods of time during the day, different rates during different periods of the day. We're going to talk about some of the rate options. Lena mentioned that we have some rate options that we're rolling out, that 3C is rolling out. We're going to go through those. Then we're going to walk through a couple examples and kind of talk about how those rate options differ relative to how you use power. Then we're going to have a little bit of review on the net metering. And as Lena mentioned, we had net metering presentation earlier, mid-March or so. But we're going to give a little bit of review because we recognize that there could be a lot of you customers, residential customers on the phone tonight that have net metering. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a few examples there. And then we'll talk about a few resources. There'll be a resource sheet where you can go to get some questions answered. And then I'll hand it back to Lena and she'll kind of wrap it up and we'll get into some of the questions. So when we talk about time of use and we talk about charging different energy rates, generation energy rates during different times of the day, we have to sort of recognize that in California, we're in a market. And the market has dramatically changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. In that, we're seeing a huge amount of renewable energy come onto the market. And so what this means is that during the day, the daylight hours from noon to 5 or so, you're seeing, or 4 or so, you're seeing a tremendous amount of renewable energy at low cost that's really driving down the price of the wholesale power during that time of day. Now, what that also means is that when load comes back on in sort of the evening hours, when people come home and they start using their appliances and start cooking dinner and getting things ready in their houses, and the load on the whole system comes back up and really starts to peak, then you're seeing a higher prices because you're having less renewable resources available for dispatch during that time to meet that load, and more reliance on more expensive types of resources. So we get this difference in pricing throughout the day, and really every hour has its own unique pricing. But for simplicity, we've sort of split these into two time periods. And really this isn't really 3CE's doing, this is really PG&E's doing. PG&E is saying, hey, we're recognizing that the market is changing and that we need to reprice our generation cost to be reflective of what we're seeing in the market. And so they've done that. They've rolled out new peak hours, which are now from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. for 365 days a year. Now, it used to be that things like holidays and weekends were different and were considered off-peak, but they're just sort of rolling them all together. And so 3CE is following suit. And that sort of transition for 3CE customers is going to occur in October. If you voluntarily, you can sort of do that now. The PG&E rolled out theirs in March, I believe. There are, of course, some exceptions. With every sort of rules, there's some exceptions, and there are exceptions for medical baseline, and as Lena mentioned, some of the care and the fair customers. There are also exceptions for solar customers that have grandfathered rate plans, so those rate plans are set. There are also customers that are already on a time of use plan and have sort of like an EV, electric vehicle rate plan. Customers that don't have quite a full year's amount of data, so those are exempted, as well as master meters. So there is a resource here, and we'll put this, there's a link here embedded here on the CPU website, CPUC, or the California Public Utility Commission website, that has all these exemptions around sort of this time of use transition. But generally speaking, everyone is going to be moving to that because it's reflective of the market as a whole. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the cost of service rate options, and we talk about what 3CE is rolling out relative to their new rates, there are sort of two different classes. There's sort of the majority of the classes, majority of the customers within the class are going to have be on the default option. And the default option is a cost-based rate. As Lena mentioned, we're sort of moving from a discounted base rate to a cost-based rate. But the default option will be a cost-based rate on the new time of use periods. And for residential, that's that 4 to 9 p.m. is the on-peak period of time. There will have an alternate option in that customers can choose to be on a seasonal flat rate. So meaning the rate is flat, there's no time differentiated energy charge throughout the day. They do vary by seasons for summer and winter. And they can be on that rate for 3 years, and then they would automatically be switched into the default option beginning of 2025. So that on the left is the majority of customers. Now there are some customers, and just like we talked about in the time of use transition, there's some exceptions. There are some customers that are exempt from the mandatory transition to this sort of cost of service rate option. And for them, those customers will also have the ability to either be on a default option or be on an alternate. For them, the default option is a cost-based rate, but it's really applied to the legacy or the historic time of use period. So those historic time of use periods that PG&E had set up, there will be certain customers that the new rates will be applied to those periods of time. For those customers as well, they will have the similar alternate option to go to a seasonal flat rate, again, a flat rate that varies by summer and winter. And similarly, if you do choose that alternate option, you'll be on there for a 3-year period and then switched automatically at the beginning of January. So those are sort of the default and the rate options. Oh, sorry, that's okay. Next slide, thank you. All right, I want to talk a little bit about some adjustments that PG&E makes. And PG&E obviously establishes the PCIA that Lena talked about before. And one of the things that what they did when they came out in 2020, their estimated PCIA rates were over collected. They overestimated. So they have a true-up process every year. It's called the ERRA, or Energy Resource Recovery Account. It's kind of a true-up process that they go through before the PUC, right? It's a regulated type of event, and interveners and companies like us go in and review those things and understand sort of where PG&E rates are going and what changes they're making. But in 2020, they over-collected, and then they said, okay, well, we recognize that we over-collected, so we are going to refund that over-collection in 2021, in calendar year 2021. So they refunded that over-collection by about 1.2 cents during that next year, that next period. So if you were a 3CE customer and you enrolled in January 2021, then you were experiencing sort of that refunding of the previous year's over-collection. Now that over-collection now and that refunding is going to end. And so the question is, in 2022, what's going to happen? And so what we've done is, when we're looking at these different bill comparisons, we've taken a sort of conservative approach, and we're saying, well, we don't think that entire 1.2 cents is going to go away, right? Or to be increasing again. And so we think we're going to be conservative, and that PG&E rates will increase by about half that, but about 0.6 cents on average, right, starting in January 2022. So when we look at the rate comparisons, it's important to know that adjustment is in there. And the reality, we won't know exactly what that adjustment will be until about July of this year, because that's when the ERA is filed, and it's actually filed in June, and they go through a fair amount of back and forth. And roughly July timeframe, we'll have a much better sense of what that will be relative to what future PG&E rates will be. So for the purposes of this exercise and the purposes of this study, we had to make some assumptions. And we think that making the adjustment that the rates are going to increase by 0.6 cents, or half of that 1.2 cents that they were sort of over crediting before, is a reasonably conservative assumption to use going forward. Next slide, please. So we want to look at a couple different customer bills here, and we want to walk through with you guys sort of what the what the impacts are to these bills relative to different customer usage and different customer characteristics. So what we have here is a commercial residential customer on what was called the ETOUC rate. That's the nomenclature that PG&E uses. And this customer uses about 8.5 megawatt hours annually. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means they use about 715 or so kilowatt hours in a month. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's how much energy you use. So I don't live in California, but I have 3 kids in my house. I use about 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, right? So, you know, this customer here, and this is an actual 3CE customer, using about 715 kilowatt hours every month. And of course, they use it differently, right? In the summertime, they may use more. In the wintertime, they may use less. You know, it just sort of varies depending on how they use their electricity and what they're using it for. If they're using it for heating, they're using it for air conditioning, if they're using it for, you know, just base load type operations. And what we wanted to show this example, the reason why we have this example in here is that we wanted to show different loads, different load profiles, examples of this is, again, the same customer. We took 2 different days. We said, okay, here's day 1. And you can see in day 1, the usage is pretty low during the morning. In fact, day 1 and day 2 look pretty similar until about 7 or 8 in the morning. And then day 1, that load starts coming up. So the person or the family was at home that day, and whatever day this was, they started using energy, and then it started peaking, and it peaked around hour 15, which is about 3 p.m. Right, and then it dramatically dropped off. So for whatever they were doing there, whether or not they were all washing their clothes or they were all you know, using lots of appliances during that peak hour, that's what their load looked like for that day. Now, similarly, that same family or that same user here in day 2, right, you could see that they were, again, very similar before about 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. But then during the day, they used much less energy. They started peaking at about 4 p.m., about hour 16. But then they ended up using more energy in the later evening hours. And now, why is this important? Well, the reason it's important is because how you use electricity will determine whether or not you would be better off being under the sort of the default proposed time of use rate, or you should select the seasonal rate design. And 3CE is going to offer some resources to help you figure this out. And there's going to be a rate calculator on their website and all sorts of great you know, assistance for you to figure this out. But essentially, it comes down to how you're using energy throughout the day. So if you're using energy with more amounts of energy in the off-peak periods, then you benefit from the time of use rate design, because the time of use rate design says, hey, during those off-peak periods, your rate is lower, right, and than it is in the on-peak. Now, if you use more power in the on-peak, you're better off with the seasonal flat rate design, because it doesn't matter when you're using the power, the rate is exactly the same. Again, changes for summer and winter. So looking over at these example bills here, what we've put together now, again, this is a generation bill comparison. This is just comparing to what 3CE would charge you if you were a 3CE customer relative to what PG&E would charge you. And that's that first column. And we're estimating that with that adjustment to the PCIA, the 0.6 cents. And so we've said, okay, an average summer bill for this customer and day 1, right, so this load profile of day 1 would be about $46.20 for the generation portion only during the summer. During the winter, it would go up a little bit. The average monthly is about $48.94. The next column over is what Lena was talking about before, and the current rate design, where 3C says, okay, we're going to take the PG&E rate, we're going to remove the PCIA and some of the other fees, we're going to discount it by a certain amount, and then we're going to apply that rate back. And so you can see they're sort of in lockstep, right? During the summer bill, winter bill, and the monthly bill, they're all lower, but they're sort of in a similar type of fashion. Now, under the proposed cost of service-based rates is what we're talking about, which what 3C is rolling out. You can see that For one, whether or not you're under the time of use base rate design or the flat rate design, that bill is lower, right? Because we think the costs are lower. 3C is offering you a lower price product. And so the average summer bill, about $38, the average winter bill for the time of use, $49. The average monthly is $46.15. If you were on the flat rate design, your average monthly is about $47 or $48. So again, very close, but a little higher, right? Because again, that reflects the usage pattern of day one, where you're using the majority of your electricity in an off-peak period of time. And so therefore you're taking advantage of that lower rate. The next table down below that is day two load profile for a seasonal flat rate design, which favors the seasonal flat rate design. So again, you have the same, PG&E rate estimate, the 3C under the current rate design, their current approach to rate design. But then you can see that the average monthly bill for a day two load profile under the time of use rate design is about $52. And under the seasonal flat rate design is again about $48. So it really sort of depends on how you're using energy as to whether or not you'd be better off under the time of use rate design or the seasonal flat rate design. So next slide, please. All right, so this is another 3C customer. This is a 3C customer that is under the electric vehicle rate. That, as Lena mentioned, there's a number of you guys, residential customers, that are under EV rate design. And again, we're doing a very similar type of analysis, but this one uses 7.3 megawatts annually, which is about 600 kilowatt hours in a month. And this is sort of for the whole house, but they also have an EV, and so they're trying to take advantage of the fact that the 3C offers us this EV rate design. And so again, looking at 2 different days. So in day one, you can see that there's sort of minimal load going on in the house that it peaked up around 10 o'clock in the morning. So it could be that, so there for that 2-hour window there, this customer plugged in their EV, right? So they're charging their EV or for whatever it may be. And then it fell off. They left the house, turned everything down, and you can see the load kind of flows down during the middle part of the day. It comes up a little bit in the evening. For whatever reason, that's their load profile. Day two, you can see it's lower during the early morning periods, but then at about 4 or 5 p.m. or so, it starts coming back up and really peaks and has like 5 kW of demand, which is a pretty significant amount of demand on the system. And so that could very well be that in this day two, we have to capture when they plugged in their EV for that 4 or 5 hour period there. So again, looking over at the rate design and the estimated total rates and bills, you can see that we're doing a comparison again, looking at forecasted PG&E rates for 2022, that discount under the current rate design. And you can see that the proposed cost service time of use rate design under day one, is that my mouse or is that, Lena, is that your mouse? Sorry, okay, there you go. Is about $44 on the average monthly under the time of use rate design. Under the seasonal flat rate for that day one profile is $47.50. Similarly, on the day two profile, the time of use cost rate design proposed average monthly rate is $52 versus $47.50. So the question is really, again, it kind of comes down to how you're using power, how consistently you're using power, as to which one of these rate designs you're sort of better off. And again, the difference isn't dramatic, but it can add up, and it certainly can be important to you in making that decision. So, okay, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I wanted to go back a little bit. We gave a presentation in mid-March on net metering rates and some of the changes that are proposed for net metering customers. And so I want to go over those a little bit with you now. And these are the same slides. Again, if you pull that up from the previous presentation, these are the same slides. So some of the changes, I'll just kind of walk through some of the current and then under the proposed. And again, that proposed is going to be effective January 1, 2022. So probably the biggest change is that 3C is implementing a fixed charge. Right now, there is a $0 per month fixed charge, and again, this applies to everyone. And we're proposing $4.50 per month as a fixed customer charge. Now, the reason for that is because 3C incurs a lot of fixed costs, and obviously a fixed charge helps recover some of that fixed cost and helps reduce some of the inequity between solar customers and non-solar customers. There are also some changes in the program, the way the billing cycles work. Right now, the debits and credits are sort of reconciled on an annual basis on the anniversary of when you as a net metering customer hooked up to the system. That is going to change to sort of a monthly monthly analysis around some of the net consumption and the credits. Some of the credits may accumulate, and they may be over the course of the year. Those would be trued up at the sort of the 12th month of the billing cycle for all customers. And there are some caps over which, if it's like $200 for talk about the net surplus compensation for residential and $500 for non-residential, then you can have the option of 3Cs, sending you a check, or you can apply that dollar value to your account. So it's not like you're losing that value. It's just sort of a true-up process at the end of the year to help 3Cs sort of clear their books. As I mentioned, the net surplus compensation is changing. So about 20% of net metering customers on 3C system are net generators, meaning that they, at some point during the year, they're over generating and they're sending energy back to 3C. Currently, 3C is valuing that energy back to them at the embedded rate, or the wholesale, sort of an average of the wholesale and retail charges at about 6.3 cents. Now, what's proposed is if you move to the time of use rate option, then for any excess credits, you'll get the value of the wholesale market price. So 3C's done some analysis and said, hey, if we were going to sell that excess energy back to the market, the average wholesale market price is about 2.5 cents. So that's what we're going to value the net surplus compensation under the time of use rate option, if that's what you choose. If you choose to stay on the seasonal flat rate option, then 3C is going to say, okay, well, we're going to continue to sort of use our average retail rate, about 6.4 cents during the summer and about 6 cents during the winter months, as the value of the compensation, if you will, to that excess generation. So again, it kind of depends on how much generation you have and when you have that generation relative to which one of those rate options might make sense to you. There are also some administrative expenses right now. It's about 3 times as expensive to deal with the net metering customer, just because of all the sort of analysis and time required. Under the proposed rate, it's going to be less costly. It's still a little bit more expensive than it is under sort of a general residential customer, but it'll be a little less costly. So, next slide, please. So let's look at a few examples here. So what we've got is a proposed sort of time of use rate, looking at a residential net metering customer under sort of that default option that we talked about before, the default option being the time of use rate. So we're looking at 3 different scenarios. We've got sort of a customer with no solar, we've got a customer with some solar, and then we've got a customer with sort of lots of solar, right? So the solar output varies from 0 to 150 kilowatt hours a month to 1,000 kilowatt hours. So you can see that first customer without solar, that customer is using about 500 kilowatt hours a month. They'll have a customer charge of $4.50. That's going to apply to all residential customers. They're going to be an energy charge of about $30, so a total net charges of about $35. The customer with solar, with the smaller size solar, is generating about 150 kilowatt hours a month solar output. So they're going to get that customer charge of $4.50. The energy charge then is reduced, right, because they're offsetting that energy usage with their solar, right? So their energy charge is reduced. So their total rate charges during this month would be about $27.01. Again, this is the generation bill on their bill, not the other services that PGE provides. Finally, in the last column, you have a customer with rather large solar, right? So they're using 0 net on the basis at the end of the month. And in fact, they're setting back 500 kilowatt hours of excess energy. And so their customer charge, again, they're going to say a customer charge of $4.50. You'll see here under the energy charge, they do have an energy charge of $3.45 because during the time of use, they needed to use more energy during that time of use period than they produced during that during that peak period or whatever it may be. However, they are getting that credit, right? They're getting that net surplus credit. So they're getting a credit on their bill of $13.25 for that portion. So overall, their bill for that month or that period is $5.30. So you can see that sort of looking at different ranges of customers without solar, small solar, and sort of large solar as just sort of a hypothetical example, right? But this is under the proposed time of use rate. So under the seasonal flat rate, if you go to the next slide, please. So under the seasonal flat rate, again, we have the three customers or the three scenarios, right? Same sort of profile, right? We've got a customer without solar, customer with solar, and customer with very large solar. And so you can see under the proposed seasonal flat rate, well, their customer without solar is exactly the same bill as it would be under the time of use, because that's just sort of how the math worked out for this profile, right? They're exactly at $35. The customer with the solar netting, again, is going to see a $4.50 charge, customer charge. The energy credit's going to be reduced, and their bill is going to be about $25, so slightly less than it would be under this time of use rate. And then the customer with the excess or the very large solar, now you see they see the $4.50 customer charge, but they don't see any energy charge because, again, they're on a sort of a flat rate, and so they're offsetting that. There's no sort of time differentiation relative to when their solar is producing relative to when they're using power. They also get that NXC credit. Again, that credit rate is higher, so that their total rate charges, again, is a credit now of $26.20 for this month. So again, it's going to depend on not only sort of how you use power, but when your solar is generating relative to whether or not the proposed time of use rate or the seasonal flat rate makes sense for you. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that we have some resources, and the 3Cs put together some resources. Obviously, their webpage, as Lena was talking about, there's a cost of service tab there that you can go through and get a better understanding. These webinars are all recorded and available for you. There will be a frequently asked questions out there. There'll be some talking points out there as well. I mentioned earlier on there's this cost comparison tool that 3C is working on. It'll be sort of available in late June and early July, so that you'll be able to determine sort of whether or not that time of use or the flat rate makes more sense to you. The 3C is saying you need to make a one-time sort of decision as to whether or not you want to be on that default or that alternate rate, and you need to make that decision by October 15th, 2021. There will also be board meetings. There's also, as Lena showed on that schedule, there's lots of board meetings coming up, and there's opportunities for customers to attend and provide input. And there's the call center, so the customers can engage, talk to the energy advisors about what their options are and about what these changes may look like. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Lena, and you can wrap it up.
Thank you. So Scott, I do want to thank you very much for walking everyone through these bills and the comparison of what those examples look like. I mean, you can definitely tell that it is going to depend on how you're using energy, and to determine what one of those options is actually going to be the best fit for you. And so the resources are definitely going to be made available to you, so you have the information that you need to make an informed decision. Ultimately, the end goal, right, is to make sure that under this new cost of service design, customers are going to have the simplicity, the competitiveness, the predictability, which I know I keep repeating it, but these rates will be in place for 3 years. So there's nothing more predictable than the same rates for 3 years. The fairness, because the same criteria will be used to determine the rates across all customer classes. And then the options, because we are providing those multiple options for you to select so that you know that you have the best one for your home, or if you just happen to also be a business owner for your business. Additionally, Cost of service and the new rate design structure is going to help to utilize rates to shift behavior change, but ultimately is better for the system, it's better for the grid, and it helps us meet our climate goals, not just in California, but of course in the Central Coast. And then our customers will continue to have the benefit of having access to energy programs. That is something that we don't say enough about, but we do have energy programs. For example, our electric vehicle program that's happening right now that our customers are able to take advantage of, and we will be continuing to roll out programs for the benefit of our customers. So without further ado, that ultimately wraps up the presentation portion. The rest of this time is going to be for you on the webinar to actually have some of your questions answered. So once again, if you joined us a little bit later on and missed the intro, we do have a Q&A section. You're actually able to hover your mouse and that little bar will pop up and you'll see Q&A right there. Click on it and you can type your question there. And then we'll actually be able to answer those questions for you here during the remainder of the webinar. So without further ado, I know that we do have J.R. Killigrew, our Director of Communications and Outreach, available to assist with moderating some of this Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Lena. And welcome, everybody. I know it's a beautiful day on the Central Coast, so we appreciate everyone taking their time out of their active schedules to join us. We have about 51 questions, so I did want to, instead of going one by one, I wanted to kind of take a stab at kind of grouping them together. So one of the themes that I'm seeing about is, one, when 3CE came to fruition, our benefits were multifaceted, where we were accelerating green energy and helping to kind of accelerate economic development. Moving to this cost of service model is one of the best decisions we can make. When you think about tracking the IOUs and watching what they're doing with rates and following how they set their rates, really inhibits our ability to be flexible, and it inhibits our ability to be locally controlled. Our rates are set by our board, our policy board, and that gives us the flexibility to deliver on our promises to being competitive. And that is the one thing that I want to hammer home today on this group, is the importance of us. And the root of what community choice aggregation is all about is being locally controlled and having that choice. The second component I want to mention is about, there is this major time of use transition that's happening in October, especially in the Central Coast. 3CE did not have to have this flat rate option. When we were going through a cost of service model under the leadership of our CEO, he wanted to work with our board and see about providing options to customers. This time of use transition is something that the state's mandating all of the IOUs to move forward with. But this gives customers an option to evaluate what's going to be the best thing for me. And I saw another question that was about, well, how long is this flat rate, the seasonal flat rate, going to be available? It's going to be available for 3 years. So we're giving all customers an ability to off-ramp through this time of use transition if that flat rate is the best point, that best service offering possible. There's no way to avoid the time of use transition on the delivery side of the bill. And I've also seen a couple other questions about billing, who are we, where did we come from, all that good stuff. So just to reiterate, you are a shared customer with us. PG&E handles the billing as well as the delivery of electricity. We go out and source the energy from clean and renewable resources. So I also saw some questions about folks wondering, how do I know if I'm a 3CE customer? Actually, you can see it on the front page of your bill. You will see 3CE electric generation charges. And then for all residential customers, on the third page of your bill, you will see a detailed breakdown of those charges. I did also want to pivot to a great question from an EV driver. I actually am an EV driver as well. I'm on the EVA rate. So effectively what's going to be happening with EV customers is if you are on one of the legacy rates, you will be grandfathered on those time of use periods, but not on the rates. All the rates are going to adjust according to the time, according to our cost of service model. So basically you'll still be able to benefit from that 2 to 9 peak period, as opposed to the new time of use rate would be 4 to 9. So those are some of the some of the changes that are happening. I have a lot of questions from solar, but I'm trying to at least kind of address some of the more general questions, because as Lena mentioned, we have, I think, about 300,000 plus general residential customers, and then about 26,000 residential NEM customers. So we do appreciate all of our customers, but I want to make sure that we can address all of those elements. Another question was about the cost of service. That's a great question. How does one determine cost of service? So we do that from building, it's foundational building. So you're looking from building the bottom up. So what does it cost to go out and procure energy for all of our customers? That's about, I think, at least 80 to 85%, maybe even 90% of our ongoing costs. And then the remaining 10% of our costs deal with setting aside 3% for energy programs, setting aside a few percent for our rainy day rate stabilization fund, and the remaining balances for our administrative costs. That's how we build up to cost of service. So it's exactly all of those inherent components are the cost to serve you. So there's no surplus revenue, there's no profit. We are a public agency, we're a joint powers authority. So our mission is really to drive that competitiveness. And that is why cost of service is so important, because it allows us just to recoup the cost to serve you. We're not trailing behind the IOUs trying to figure out what they're doing all the time. And it allows us to set these rates and provide options and predictability. So I just want to kind of reiterate that we are the first CCA in the state that's doing this. We have all the other CCAs in the state that's actually coming, that's looking to us into what we're doing. So I really just want to make sure that folks are clear about the fact that also this has been going on, our discussions with our policy board and our board for well over a year. And all of this outreach and engagement that we're doing is to help educate the community, give you information, give you resources, and have adequate time for us to understand you and what your customers' needs are until we move forward with kind of making the shift. And again, just to be clear, we have our special meeting, our operations board meeting next week. We have a special meeting, on May 12th. Then the CAC, our Community Advisory Council, and our policy board meets in June. And then we had basically set our budget in September of 2021. And these rates would go live in January of 2022. And it's just for the PG&E service territory. So whoever lives from Vandenberg Air Force Base all the way up to Waddell Creek, that is the beautiful PG&E service territory that we serve. And then the customers who are in SCE service territory, we will be looking at cost of service probably not until early 2023. I want to hear a great question from a customer about tiered usage pricing. So the old E1 rate with the seasonal flat rate, does that go away? You would be transitioned on the generation side to our seasonal flat rate, but you would still have the tiered on the delivery side. So you'll just be migrated into that seasonal flat rate. So again, it's just one price per kilowatt hour all times a day. And then we have one rate in the summertime and one rate in the wintertime. Just trying to scroll through. Question from a NEM customer, and a few of them, about the $4.50 fixed charge. Will that be applied to our NEM bill? Yes, it will. But the one thing we do want to reiterate about that is, as a NEM customer, when we move to monthly billing, if you produce more than you consume and your credits outweigh the charges, those credits will be able to kind of wipe away those charges, including that $4.50 fee. So that's one thing that as a NEM customer, you actually have a function of being able to offset your monthly charges should you produce more than you consume. So I think that's another good value proposition that we want to share. Just scrolling on down. Let's see. Now, one customer asked about, please define cost of service. So hopefully I did that, but again, I just want to give another shot at explaining that cost of service is effectively the opportunity for an electric utility to charge a customer exactly what it costs to serve them. So basically, whatever we need to do to go out to be an effective electric utility, we will go out and charge you for that through either the $4.50 fee, which is just for residential customers, and then the price per kilowatt hour. That is something that we charge all customers. All right. We are running down. We've got a couple minutes till go, but I wanted to see if, let's see, what is happening with commercial customers? That's a great question. We actually have two, we had an ag workshop with them. I think it was last week, and a commercial customer one previous. Please go to our webpage so you can check out those two recordings. And if, again, our team here, our energy account services team is here to help our customers, our commercial customers, to answer any questions that they have about this transition. Let's see, I'm just scrolling through to see if there's any other, may not be about rates, but there have been a couple of questions about our programs. This is a really great question that you've asked. So right now we actually have, I believe, 5 programs in the works right now. We have a program for incentivizing EV ridership, so getting into electric vehicle through our EV incentive program. If you're looking at installing an electric vehicle charging station at your home or multi-unit family, we have incentives for that, as well as helping with panel upgrades. We have an ag electrification program right now that's supporting our wonderful ag industry in the Central Coast. We actually have almost all of the funding subscribed to date. That's helping the ag industry move away from fossil fuel equipment to electrification equipment. We also have a new construction electrification grant program, which has 2 tracks. One we're really excited about, that for fire victims in Santa Cruz County and parts of Monterey County who've been reg tagged by CAL FIRE, we're helping them to rebuild all electric through incentives. And then conversely, on building new construction, we have incentives for market rate and affordable housing developers right now, and we're still doing a great job getting the word out for there. So thank you for those questions about that. And then last but certainly not least, we actually have an electrification or an energy education grant program. So if you're a nonprofit or a group that's looking at engaging the community, that's a good resource for you to submit a grant to us or an application to hopefully be funded to help kind of move this clean energy paradigm forward in the Central Coast. We are at 6 o'clock right now. I do want to say thank you very much. I know there are a lot of questions that still may want to be answered. But most likely we will have another opportunity to engage. This is not the end of this conversation. We have a special meeting coming up in a few weeks that you're going to join and provide comment. I do encourage you to call our call center, but also take a look at our webpage. Any of the recordings that are coming out, we're also developing an FAQ. And then over the course of these next 4 to 6 months, we'd be continuing to engage with our community to make sure that we are kind of being upfront and transparent and forthright about this transition, which at the end of the day is going to support customers and provide us an opportunity to drive those economic and environmental benefits. So I will turn it back to you, Lena. Again, we will actually take all these questions that may not have been answered, and staff's going to do their best to get back and respond to these questions in the next, I'd say, give us 5 to 7 business days, because there's a lot to answer here, but we want to make sure we're good stewards of our customer base today.
I would like to thank everyone, both from the 3CE team and the Nugent team, for joining us this evening. We did have a little bit over 180 attendees at the start of our presentation. And as questions got answered, of course, some folks left the room, but we do still have a box full of questions that will be presented. I would like to encourage also those of you who had questions regarding the net energy metering, again, to access the recordings, because we did answer a lot of the questions in the net energy metering webinar. If you don't want to wait for us to respond to and post the FAQs, you may go there and find some of those answers a little bit sooner. Thank you so much for joining us this evening and for giving us an extra 5 minutes of your time. We will continue to provide more information and answers to your questions along the way, and we look forward to providing you excellent service for the remainder of our time with you. Thank you and have a nice evening.